Здравствуйте, друзья! Я думаю, что к нам сегодня еще присоединятся другие слушатели. Сегодня у нас совершенно необычный семинар, и я надеюсь, что он будет интересен не только историкам, потому что мы будем говорить не только о прошлом в истории, но и о будущем. И темой нашего сегодняшнего исследовательского семинара в Центре цифровой гуманитаристики является перспективы исторических данных. И сегодняшние наши уважаемые спикеры совершенно непростые люди, а очень интересные исследователи, которые приглашены вот из разных, получается, стран, да, нашего мира. И самое интересное в том, что у них очень разный фокус на данные, и они используют совершенно разные данные в своей работе. И сегодня мы начнем с профессора Главацкой Елены Михайловны, доктора исторических наук, профессора кафедры археологии и этнологии Уральского федерального университета. Елена Михайловна много работает с источниками по демографии, и при ее участии реализовано большое количество проектов разных уровней. Еще Елена Михайловна работает в научной лаборатории Международного центра демографических исследований, и сегодняшнее выступление обозначено как «Регистр населения Урала, история создания, проблемы, развития и информационный потенциал». Елена Михайловна, пожалуйста.
Добрый день, коллеги. Мою презентацию.
Презентацию видно, но она не в режиме презентации.
А в чем она?
Она просто как слайды. Не запущена презентация.
Лучше?
Сейчас запустилась, да.
Добрый день, коллеги. И я должна извиниться. I have to apologize for I wasn't aware that there will be some foreign participants. And basically, I could have made presentation in English and then speak in Russian. But right now, we have the other way around. The presentation is in Russian, and I will perhaps speak both languages, making kind of summary for each slide. Since the Russian participants can read what it is there on the slide, let me tell you. We've been working since 2014. We've been working on making a rural population register, and that is based on individual level data transcribed from different type of sources, mainly the tax censuses of the 19th century and church records. And today I will be speaking most about what we can do using the part which is based on the church records. And the topic is the history of creation, the potential, and the problems of developing. So we all started with studying religious landscape, and the Ural Federal University I'm representing had several schools which are focusing on studying religious issues. And here on the map, you can see the religious landscape of Yekaterinburg city, how it was at the end of 19th, early 20th century, before the revolution. And you can see that there are different institutions, mainly churches, Orthodox Church, old believers who split from the Orthodox Church, Muslims, Jewish, Lutherans, Catholics. So it was rather religiously diverse area and rather city, because there was a development of industrial enterprises, and very many engineers were attracted and came to the Urals and to Yekaterinburg particularly. at the end of 19th century, its population grew rapidly from, say, 40,000 until 100,000 by the beginning of the First World War. And of course, there were religious communities, and on the previous map, you could see different types of religious institutions, but here we presented only those who had parishes. So 5 Russian Orthodox, 2 Old Believers, 2 единоверцы, those who originated from Old Believers, but inclined to join the Russian Orthodox Church, the official one. Then Muslims, Lutherans, Catholics, and there is also a synagogue. So we've been studying that for several years, and the problem was the lack of sources. And what we did, we found there interesting source material, which not many people used at that time, mainly the parish registers of all the denominations. And now it is more difficult since it's in Russian, but you could see that the Russian Orthodox Church, the official Russian Orthodox Church majority composed up to 96%. Then there was a Muslim minority, the biggest one, almost 2%, then very small Catholic, Lutherans, and Jews, less than 1%. And of course, the situation was developing, and already by the First World War, the Muslim community increased until 5%. And that is basically what we had about the religious communities. So that's why we decided to look for the parish records, which in Russian we called метрические книги. And the tradition of making these records goes back to the 18th century. It was introduced by Russian Emperor Peter the Great, or Peter the First. So there was a lot of information, demographic information, but not only. Also, it was interesting because that was the only alternative source of individual level data, because we have a tradition that all the census materials, after they were aggregated and processed and published, the primary sources were destroyed. And also we found out that it was a universal for the whole Eurasia source. And so that allowed us to make kind of comparative research studies. And here you can see the examples of different church or parish records. There's one about those who were born, and it also included the information about baptism and the parents, their occupation, where they're from, and their parents, godparents' names and their origin. So quite a lot of information. The same type as you can see about the Jewish population and about the Catholics. So I just thought that it would be interesting to show how this source material looked like. And we transcribed all the data into the database. And here you can see the example about the bone. And the principle of making this database was to fill all the information which was in the source material. Then, of course, we have to correct it, to code it, and then depending on what kind of research we are interested in, we would process it further. Basically, every data, this main database, Register, composed of several databases, and each of them has main parts about the place where the event took place, who were the persons involved, the timing, the different details of the event. And each database includes great number of fields about the birth 77, about the marriages 132, because there were also witnesses of the event. then about the deaths, 66, and of course there were also the divorces, but that was only for the Jews and for the Muslims. Russian Orthodox Church didn't allow their divorce in a very exceptional cases. So we transcribe this data, and this process is still running. And here is the table, what kind of source material and how many of each we have. And you can see how many parishes we have, starting with the Russian Orthodox Church, then those who split from the Russian Orthodox Church, those who try to incline back using some principles of the Russian Orthodox Church, but keeping their ritual practices, the Единоверцы, then Catholics, Lutherans, Jews, and Muslims. Right now we have up to 60,000 60,000 entries, and that's only based on the church records. But as I said, there are also ревизские сказки, that's text censuses for Yekaterinburg and also for the northern area of Siberia. So what kind of research topics we're studying? I mean, I should have said that it's a group of some 10 people, some because some students come, some leave the group after graduating, but basically there are about 10 people working, and that creates certain problems which I will address later on. But depending on our research interests, there are some topics which we can cover. And of course, there is a lot about the historical demography. It's marriage strategies, deaths, mortality, fertility. So all these basic topics. But we also do the what we call urban anthropology. And I think that is probably the most important right now direction of the development of our studies. Why urban anthropology? So it has a lot to do with the developing of urban studies during in the course of last 3 decades in Russia. And of course, there are not too many sources about the population. There's a lot about architecture and industrial development, but not much about people themselves. And the problem is, as I referred to it earlier, our tradition to destroy the primary source material. So what can we do to understand how the cities were developing and still are developing is the way to try to find something which could be kind of analog to their anthropological studies. So a lot of information from the population, and we found out that what we can replace the interviews and enquetes, which we cannot use these methods for the 19th and early 20th century, is to study the materials of their parish records. They led us to see what was going on the parish level. We can even look at the different families, how they were developing and living and what problems they had to confront with. And of course, we can also look at this process in dynamics. This database allows us to analyze very big, well, compared, to be honest, compared with European databases, it's really not big. But we've been working since 2014, so that's how much we managed by now. And we consider it's a really big one and big achievement. And we started to do the record linkage, although we haven't yet made much progress in that. and I will let you know why is that. And what we can do is to study certain topics or analyze some processes which without this brackets we wouldn't be able to do. And what we are interested mostly in studying the everyday life of the population of Yekaterinburg. And we have now the data, we started to transcribe also the earlier period, but right now we have the pool of entries from 1880 until 1919, when the process of registering vital events in the church was stopped by the Soviet power and replaced by the office where all these events were registered. So what we found out, which we of course could have guessed was the case, but still now we can see what was the scale of this phenomenon, how it was developed, and what were the differences between different parishes. And this phenomenon of illegitimate children, foundlings, and the process of how they were put into the new family. Also very interesting practices which we wouldn't be able otherwise to learn about, of naming and baptisms, and also very interesting studies about the baptism of the adults who decided to be Russian Orthodox church members rather than, say, Lutherans or Jewish or Catholic. So just few examples. You can see the graphs, that's the numbers of those who were baptized, and what we could have expected that after 1905, when there was the law of religious tolerance introduced, that there was certain decrease of the numbers, but then later on that was returned back, and most of those who decided to be baptized were basically the representatives of Jewish population for the reasons of discrimination of this particular denomination in Russia, even after the 1905. We also figure out that some women had to seek for help in the maternal houses before the delivery, and that there was a set of the staff of professionals who helped them with that. But what was interesting that when there was a danger that the baby can die, then the ladies who helped to give birth, they would also baptize, or at least make the first stage of baptisms, and then the priests would be invited to finish the whole rite. We figure out by making the record linkage between the data of baptisms and births to understand how many days there was before the baptisms, and the mean age of baptized person was just 3 days. So within a very short period, within 3 days, they had to arrange their baptisms. And that was different for the Russian Orthodox Church population. The Lutherans and the Catholics would do it after the baby reached 1 month. And that was crucial for infant mortality, because most of the deaths happened exactly during this first month of life. We found out an interesting phenomenon of giving the same name to the twins. say in 1890 and triples in 1892, there were cases in one of the elite parishes in Yekaterinburg, Cathedral Parish, where there were their twins born, and both got name Ioan, and there was another case when there were triples and all got the name Nikolai. And I have to say that both Ivans and Nikolais, they died very soon after the birth, so obviously there was no time to baptize these weak kids, and then in a status of hurry, they were baptized just in one action, so to say. It was a general understanding that in Russian Orthodox Church, people got married very early, and we figure out that actually that was not the case for Yekaterinburg, and there were very small fragment of girls who would marry before they are 16, so at the age of 15, and even less than 1% of grooms who married before they reached 17 years old. Generally, the average age of marriage for their brides was 21, and for the grooms 24. And basically, the difference between the ages of marriage was 4 years. That was average for the whole city, except of Muslim population. In the Muslim families, husbands were usually 8-9 years older than their wives. There were cases of divorce, some quite interesting, but I think I shouldn't stop too much on that. Also study and figure out based on this source, is their usual causes of death in Yekaterinburg, and see the gender and religious and age differences. We studied the infant mortality rate, so how many kids died before living or reaching 1 year, and that was quite high. Permskaya gubernia, Perm province was leading in this, so up to 500 per million, so 500 of 1,000 usually died. But in Yekaterinburg, it was 400. And most usual case was the infection diseases, and that was due to their lack of or poor sanitary condition in the city, and there was no general water supply, so the quality of water was very low until 1926. And here you can see the dynamics of the infant mortality rate. So it was rather high, and the majority, as I said, infection diseases. But when we looked at the different denominations, we could see that the highest among all was the Russian Orthodox Church representatives, and it was much better with Jewish population, Catholics, Lutherans, and even Muslims. And there are different explanations. Of course, their level of education was much higher among Jews, Catholics, and Lutherans, but not among the Muslims. In this case, I think the breastfeeding played a crucial role, because according to the Muslim law, they had to breastfeed until the kid is 2 years old. Also, we tried to study the migration processes. So that is the map showing the sources of formation of Catholic community. Most came of the, as expected, from the western provinces of Russian Empire, but there were also a lot coming back from Siberia. And one of the latest research which we did. It's how their death causes were established and how this process developed. So we figure out that the old-fashioned types of death causes, they were diminishing, and very important moment was that there were new priests coming to, for example, Ascension Church Parish, coming from the graduate from Kiev Academy, and he not only himself had good medical knowledge. In addition, that was part of the education, but also obviously instructed the priests who were in his church. So the number of these funny old-fashioned diagnoses dropped significantly after he became the priest in the Ascension Church Parish. So basically what we can do using this source material is to study the minorities, ethnic and religious minorities, which otherwise are not visible. And we can do the research of national-wide scale, because that's the universal source material. And we can study things which otherwise is completely impossible to study, because there are no such many and thorough records about their everyday life in the city at that time. And now we are, I'll just list several problems. So our big data is rather small, as I said, comparing with the European and American databases. And the main task is to develop it. But the problem is that the first step, which allowed us to create what we have right now, was sponsored by the Russian Science Foundation. And now we are getting also other grants, but they are rather small. So we are developing, but the process is very, very slow. Then, of course, the quality, we try to increase the number of the data entry persons, but then the quality desires to be better. Since we are all historians with not much IT education, that also a problem, and I can see that in the PERM it is not anymore, because they are developing nicely their digital humanities, both education and the research, but we get help from the colleagues from the IT departments. We try to cooperate with genealogists, which was recommended by the colleagues from abroad, but the problem is that they are kind of greedy to their source material. They are eagerly using our, by the way, I didn't tell that, but the first slide showed the screenshot shot from our open access data. And basically the genealogists are using it very actively. And when we had to a little bit update it, there were thousands of calls asking when it will be opened back, but none of them so far shared their data with us. But we are working in this direction, and there is some hope. And crowdsourcing, so far it didn't work with us. So I think I can just stop on that. And should I say something in Russian right now? But I think that the slides were in Russian, so maybe that's enough.
Actually, I've checked among the audience, so no need to translate it in Russian, so we can keep our time. And thank you so much, Elena, for this interesting talk. And the first thing is that I would like to ask about the questions. If you have a question in English
Sure.
or in Russian, you can just ask it orally or type it in the chat.
Yes, I want.
Да, пожалуйста, Анна. Как комфортнее.
Да, разрешите я по-русски, а Надежда поможет с переводом. Елена Михайловна, спасибо, как всегда, за прекрасный доклад. Сколько раз вас не слушаю, всегда с большим интересом. Большой интерес вызывает ваше сообщение. Вопрос. Подскажите, пожалуйста, почему такое большое количество записей в вашей базе данных относительно браков? Это первый вопрос. Там 132 поля, если я не ошибаюсь, у вас было заведено под этот тип данных. И второй вопрос. Все-таки где можно посмотреть эту базу данных? Я так поняла, она есть онлайн где-то на каких-то генеалогических разных форумах. Вот. И третий вопрос, очень короткий. Вот вы работаете прямо с метрическими книгами в архиве, то есть вы их не заказываете в оцифрованном виде? Как вот? Я всегда поражаюсь просто исследователям, которые сидят с этими талмудами в читальных залах, и вот думаю, как же вы такой большой проект делаете? Поделитесь. Спасибо.
Спасибо, Анна, за вопросы. Я чуть-чуть не приготовилась записать. Если я что-то забуду, вы мне напомните, пожалуйста. Значит, я забыла уже первый, но хорошо помню второй. Почему так много полей? Смотрите, это для удобства. То есть мы разделяем дату рождения на 3 части. Мы разделяем имя, отчество и фамилия на 3 части, с тем, чтобы потом легче нам было работать. Мы добавляем там, где это нет, но мы можем реконструировать это губерния, иногда уезд. В браках, смотрите, сами брачующиеся 2. Папа, мама дополнительно, свидетели дополнительно, информация о священнике дополнительно. Иногда бывают дополнительные поля, которые мы вводим, это какие-то заметки, например, позднее давались справки на основе этих метрических книг в ЗАГС там, или еще какие-то вещи, там, развод, вот такие вещи, то есть в результате вот так много и наполняется. Понятно, что там еще есть такие вещи, как номер слайда, то есть каким образом он у нас закодирован в листинге, номера, информация о деле, из которого все это взято, и вот, в общем, смотрите, если вам будет интересно, потом напишите, я вам формуляр могу сбросить, и вы увидите, почему много. То есть мы шли по принципу, и принцип этот нам передали зарубежные исторические демографы, которые работают, что надо заносить вообще все. И мы, если честно, конечно, надорвались на этом занесении почти всего. Вот. Я забыла первый вопрос, простите.
Елена Михайловна, это был первый.
Так, тогда второй я забыла, третий помню.
Второй был, Елена Михайловна, про то, где можно в открытом виде...
Да, все, вспомнила. Данные. Значит, то же самое, это урабдата, урфуру, и на первом слайде, по-моему, было, но если что, я вот сейчас перепроверю еще раз, потому что вот когда у нас проводилась эта...
можно в чат?
Да, вот я хотела сказать, перепроверю и сброшу в чат. Вот, и третий вопрос. Да, и, конечно, у нас регистр в открытом доступе находится, то есть можно им воспользоваться. Единственное, что мы закрывали какие-то поля, вот сейчас айтишники должны открыть и побольше их, но вот пока у нас фактически оказывалось, что либо работаем мы сами, либо генеалоги, которым, в общем, практически хватало того, что было, то вот сейчас мы еще откроем поле с архивным, со ссылкой на архив, и они будут абсолютно счастливы. Что касается работы в архиве, я вам должна сказать, что кошмар. То есть часть у нас регистра сделана по материалам, хранящимся в Тобольском архиве, и тут проблем нет. У них все вот отсканировано, они молодцы, у них все отсканировано в открытом доступе, это регистрируешь, платишь небольшую денежку и делаешь то, что тебе надо. Что касается Государственного архива Свердловской области, это, конечно же, боль всех историков Екатеринбурга и тех, кто пользуется архивом ГАСО. они мало того, что не сканируют сами, во-вторых, и не выкладывают этого, они не дают, в общем-то, и нам этого делать. То есть то, что мы смогли получить, мы получали, несмотря на то, что у нас договор есть с ГАСом, мы получали так, как мы получали, сканировали, фотографировали, и дальше вот уже, конечно, это усложняло работу, я про это не стала говорить, но вы правы, вот это еще одна дополнительная беда. Вот. В чат я напишу, мне надо будет проверить, я чуть позже напишу.
Спасибо большое, Елена Михайловна, спасибо.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Would you like to have a question? Because I have a question as well. I will ask it in English. As soon as we decided to work the international game. Elena, could you tell me about the deal with modeling of the source? As much as it was difficult for you to define the thing, to observe the data through all these years and through all the amount of recordings in the database, how it was difficult to produce a sort of unique or this sort of model for this data?
Well, we just follow the source. So the frame or table in which we type the data, that was just the most obvious. I mean, we just follow the source material. To get the scans of the material, that was the most difficult part of the whole story. And then, of course, we had to elaborate the principles, how we should type, for example, if the name is misspelled and we see that it is a misspelling, whether we should follow how it is in the source material and keep the mistake, or we should correct it. So what should we do if we know something about the person? So that was a long process, and we changed one thing after another, and step by step we elaborated, and we are still working on that right now, connecting all these databases together and making them record linkage. Coding is the most difficult, but that's not the part of making them data base itself, but working with that. So depending on what you are going to do, we code. Right now we are following partly the example of coding diseases, on one hand using this international Register of Diseases, number 10, I have forgotten the exact name of that. On the other hand, there are historical names. So, well, the thing is that those who are doing the data entry and the research, I mean, if the person who is making research did the data entry, then there is most interesting results because you understand the source material. But if you get it from somewhere, or if the very advanced IT person does it without knowing the source material and the history itself, then it's a problem. So the best thing is to do the data entry and then make the research. But it is fantastic. In reality, you have to
really,
some work to others. And but that's very important then to remember what you did and whether you can trust or not, and take that issues into consideration. But otherwise, we are following the examples of or the researchers from the European demographic centers who have their huge databases and making fantastic research, which I don't know whether we'll be able to do ever. But the way to develop also to coordinate the efforts, because I know there are very many databases made at certain time by certain scholars, and some move to another topics and still have this databases. So the great thing would be to combine that all together and developing the Ural population into the Russian register of population, and using the historical part and combining with, if not contemporary, but coming to the contemporary times, which would be really great.
I fully agree with you, because source-oriented approach, it's something really hard to be realized, but it's very impactful and useful for the research and for the other topics. Okay, thank you so much, Елена Михайловна. Спасибо вам большое. And we are moving forward. I completely forgot to mention that we are recording our seminar, and also we are streaming the presentations online. So don't pay the attention too much to the amount of people here on Zoom, because so many people watch the seminar afterwards. Anyway, we highly appreciate that we have so many interesting speakers today. Not so many, but so important speakers. And it's important to move from the analog sources to the digital ones. And I would say rather we have so many issues with digitization, with modeling of data and everything, and some of them are the same for born digital sources. I will ask my colleagues. Елена Михайловна, можете закрыть презентацию? Или Даниил, закройте, пожалуйста, презентацию у Елены Михайловны. Спасибо. And now we are I'm happy to introduce to you our next speaker, Professor Nils Brügger, who is a professor in media studies, and he works in Aarhus University. He's the head of the International Researcher Network WARCnet, the Center for Digital Methods and Media, as well NetLab. And he's a coordinator of the European Network research infrastructure for the study of archived web material. And he conducts research mainly in the fields related to born digital data and web history. I have to admit that I've read a lot of your books, and the book chapters you're edited, because web history is such an important field now, because we live in the information society, and I'm happy that you're here, and we are ready to know some more about your experience.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to hear the previous presentation, and also thank you for inviting me. It's great to kind of be here in Zoom. So, and as you know, as I just mentioned, my Russian is non-existing, so I don't understand one word. But as long as I can speak in English, that's fine with me. And yeah, so I think I'll just grab the screen and share my slides here. So,
and as soon as we decided to avoid translation in Russian, so you can take your time, I won't interrupt you. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. And I'll do it, try to speak a little bit slow if that's needed. So do you see my slides now as you on the screens?
Yes, everything is perfect.
Good. So I'm going to take you through a few experiences and examples of what you can do with the archived web or material in web archives, and how you can use that as a historical source. So I'm going to show 3 cases, what I call a close reading. You probably know the distinction between close reading and distant reading. So how can you use this source type for a close reading, and for a middle distant reading, and for a distant reading? So it's going to be a little more clear, hopefully, once I get started. But just to give you an impression of what is a web archive, because I don't know if you are aware of what it is. So this is what I found from the University in the Internet Archive. It's a beautiful web page from 1999. I don't know if any of you have any experience with it from that period, but this is what the archived web looks like. It's old web material that has been on the online web, that has been archived by an institution, in this case, the US-based Internet Archive. And I also found the web page in the archive, it's only 5 years old, from 2016, from your Center for Digital Humanities. So you can see how it looked at that time. So that was just to give you an impression of what is it I'm talking about when I talk about archive web. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about the following points. I'm going to introduce myself briefly. Then the overall landscape of digital sources, where I distinguish between 3 different types of sources. Few words about that web archives are not archives, which is a little bit strange. And why should we then have web archives? And then comes the 3 cases I'm going to take you through. One is the history of dr.dk, which is the website of the National Public Service Broadcaster in Denmark. The one in with the middle reading is a study I've been doing about the networks of hyperlinks of parliamentary elections in Denmark. And the distant reading is actually a study of the entire Danish web domain .dk, which is similar to .ru. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the last in the last section. So myself, we just heard a little bit about it. I have a background which has nothing to do with digital stuff. I have a background in French language and culture and history of ideas. I wrote a PhD about the concept of the intellectual in French philosophy after World War II. It has nothing at all to do with the digital stuff. So I actually come out of a traditional humanities background. I started to study web history and the archiving of the web in 2000. And then I've been co-founder of the National Danish Digital Research Infrastructure called Digital Humanities Lab. And in that, I'm heading a subsection, which is called NetLab, where we are trying to do some work and support our research fellows with material or studying material in web archives. Also, as you mentioned, Nadeshda, I made a couple of books. So this is a list. The one here, actually, this one, you can download that for free online. It's open access. The other ones you have to pay for, unfortunately. The one in the middle here is a monograph. The other ones are edited volumes. So, and I'm just mentioned to Nadeshda that you can, she can publish or distribute my slides afterwards, so you don't have to take notes, you can just have them. Good, so that was just a few words about myself, and then the overall landscape of digital sources, as I call the next point. And this is where I distinguish between 3 types of digital sources. We heard a little bit about it here at the first presentation. So this is something I found in Russian, you probably can read it. So the first type of digital material is something that has been digitized. That's something that has existed in a non-digital form. It could be newspapers, it could be books, radio, television, or it could also be the census and the church records that we just heard about that are then digitized. Digitization can take many, many forms. It can be transcription, as we just heard, can be scanning of newspapers, etc., etc. But with the digitized material, you can always go back and find the original and then kind of check if it's correct. So the other kind of big group of digital material is what I call the born digital. So that's something on, for instance, the online web. It has not existed in any other form than the digital form that we look at. So you cannot go back and find a printed version of a website. It simply doesn't exist. What there is online on the web is born digital material, and it hasn't any analog form. And then the last big group of digital material I distinguish is what I call the reborn digital material. And that's the digital material that has then been archived, and then in the process of archiving it has been changed, and then is sort of not exactly the same. It's very different from when you're digitized, when you actually do something that is, or the result is something that is very close to what was in the analog. This is not necessarily the case when you archive the web. You actually do a number of fundamental changes. So we cannot be sure that it is exactly the same source. I've written a lot about that, so I'm not going to talk much more about that. And the good reason for trying as historians to become more skilled within the digital area is that all of these 3 digital types of material, they grow. So we continue to digitize a lot of all the stuff we have in analog form. So the digitized collections become bigger and bigger. The born digital material simply just grows and grows as I don't know how many hours of, say, YouTube video that is uploaded every hour, every second. So that grows. And also the reborn digital material grows because we archive more and more of the online web. For instance, in Denmark, the entire Danish web domain, which is the .dk domain, is archived 4 times per year. So it simply just grows. So all of these 3 types of digital material continue to grow. And that's why, as historians, we had to know something about how to deal with that. And when I say that, the point is actually that we have to deal with it in different ways. Because the web, for instance, is made in such a way that it's very different from a PDF file that is scanned of a newspaper. So there are some differences, and that's why it's important to have these 3 different overall groups in mind. Okay, so I'm going to talk mostly about the last one, the reborn digital material, that is online web that has been archived. So then a few words about that web archives are not archives. It's a little bit weird, but it's actually how it is. It's because we use the word archive in a weird way in web archives. So web archives, they collect and preserve what has been publicly available on the online web. Like the Internet Archive, they have web crawlers that runs around on the web, collects it, puts it in the archive. But it's only what has been available on the online, publicly available web. So because we have this traditional distinction between archives that usually collect what is not public, could be diaries, it could be church records as well. And then we have libraries that usually collect what has been publicly available, like books, etc. So, but with the web archives, it's actually more like a web library, but that's not the word that is used. So in the literature, it is a web archive, although it is not an archive in the traditional sense. So please have that in mind, because I'm not talking about traditional archives that have gone on the web. I'm talking about what was on the web that was then collected and put in a web archive. It should actually be called a web library, to be honest, but that's not the word that is used. So web archives, as I put it here, are not archives strictly speaking. So that's important for you to have in mind. Few examples we have in Denmark. The web archive is called Netarkivet, and it's sitting at the Royal Danish Library. We have also, as I mentioned, the Internet Archive in the US. It's a transnational web archive. You can actually find a lot of Russian material in the Internet Archive as well, as you could see the ones I just showed you in the beginning. So go to the Internet Archive, have a look. It's the address archive.org, and you'll get an impression of what is a web archive actually, and what can you find in there. So why are people doing web archives? A few words about that. The web, as I mentioned, is growing. It's just becoming bigger and bigger. There's much more and more and more material on it. And if we want to preserve that, we have to archive it and to keep it. You probably also agree with me that the web is growing in importance in society. You use the web so many times per day, you probably don't notice, but you could imagine that if, say, for 2 or 3 days, you just say, okay, I'm not going to use the web, then you definitely find out how much you use it. So it has played, and it is playing a big role in society. It also disappears, and it disappears rapidly. And a few numbers usually indicate that a web page is online for about 2 months, and then it's either gone or transformed or changed or simply just taken down. So if we want to keep the cultural heritage that is on the online web, we have to do it while it is there, and that means that we have to do it immediately. And that we could be an institution like a national library, it could be a university library, which is also taking place in many places. So the solution for these 3 points here is that we should have web archives to help us. So studying the archived web, I'm going to take you through these 3 small, you could say, cases of how you can do this type of study. So I'm going to first focus on you could say, a very traditional study in many ways. I focus on only one website, dr.dk, the national Danish broadcaster, their website. And this is a study I started some years ago, and then I sort of never ended it really because I got some other interests, but I'm going to end it probably at some point. So this is the front page of the public service broadcaster in Denmark. This is how it looked in 1996, 98, 2000, 2005, and 2006. So what I'm studying in this project is the question, as I put it in the box here, which are the driving forces behind the creation and development of the website dr.dk from 1996 to 2006? How do the driving forces affect the website? So that's the questions I'm asking related to this. And then I have also a more theoretical and methodological question, because do we need to develop new theories, new methods to study this type of object, you could say. And it is based on traditional historical source types that anyone knows. I'm using internal documents from the broadcaster, minutes, correspondence, etc. I'm also using some external documents, the press releases, etc. I made a number of interviews, all history-like. And then, of course, I like to study, I study the website itself. And the website has 2 functions. As you can see in the top here, I studied as my object of study. I try to explain and understand how it has developed. But on the other hand, the website is also a source, because the broadcaster's website has so much information in it that does not exist anywhere else, that I can also use it as a source to study it as an objective. So I hope you can get the difference between source and object. So and there's so much information in the website, in the archived versions of it, that does not exist in any paper form anywhere. So that's an example of a, you say, close reading project. I closely read and try to understand one website with all the web pages, of course, but it's focusing on one website only. If you want to read something about that, these are some of the publications that I made in relation to this project here, and I'm not going to say more about them, just mention them. So if you want to read more, you can go there. Then I'm scaling a little bit up, not only looking at one website, but looking at thousands of websites, not millions, but thousands. And that's the other project, which is a project where I would like to study the hyperlink networks of parliamentary elections. I don't know if hyperlink network does ring any bell about, in you, but the great thing with websites is that it comes with hyperlinks. You know, you press somewhere on a website and then you're taken to another page. And it's extremely interesting to map the network of those hyperlinks. So which websites are connected to which websites? How do they form a network? Via the hyperlinks. And that's what I would like to do when studying parliamentary elections in Denmark between 2001 and 2016, trying to see if specific or certain political parties, media, individual politicians, how they are connected through the hyperlinks in the network. So that's basically the project of this one. When you map hyperlink networks, it could look like the ones I have shown here from different points in time. So the size of one of these nodes, as they're called, indicates how many links that are pointing to it. So the more in links it receives, the bigger it is. Again, I'm not going to take you through the networks, but just to give you an impression what a network analysis, the result of it could look like. So the question I ask in this project is, what has characterized the hyperlink network related to parliamentary elections, and how has this developed over time? And again, I also have a theoretical, methodological question. Should we do anything in terms of methods, theory, to make this kind of project? Especially there is a challenge related to doing historical analysis of hyperlink networks, namely what I call the temporal inconsistency of the network. I have to explain that a little bit. When you archive the web, you start on, say, with one web page, then you take all the links, you archive that page, and that's what the web archives do. They archive this page, take out all the hyperlinks, follow those links where they point to, archive all those pages on where they're pointing to, take the links out of them, goes to those web pages and archives them, and then it continues as long as you ask it to. So that's how web archiving basically works. But that takes time. And for instance, the archiving of the entire Danish web domain .dk takes approximately 2 months. So you can imagine that when you point to something, it may have changed until you reach it with your web archiving software. So that means that you can have a temporal inconsistency in the network, because where you start and where you end with a hyperlink is maybe not archived at the same point in time. It may be archived with a difference of 2 months or 1 month. So that make your hyperlink network temporally inconsistent as a whole. And that's one of the methodological challenges we have with this. This study is based on hyperlinks from the websites and social media of all the political parties and members of the parliament and all major media. And then I made a Google search. I'm not going more into detail with that. It ended up with some 400 websites, and I did that once per week. So when I did that over a period of, for one of the years, I did it for, I think, a couple of months. So it adds up, it becomes rapidly thousands of websites. Yeah, and in 2011 and 16, the hyperlink network analysis, I made that during the elections and before the elections. And then I did the collection while the election was taking place, basically. But for 2001 and 7, I didn't do that. So then I'm working with the hyperlinks as they are found in the web archives. And that is the Internet Archive and the Danish Web Archive. So that's to give you an impression of a different way of working that you can sort of do when you have all this in digital form. And to give you an impression of the results in a way is that, and it doesn't make much sense because you don't know the Danish political parties, but anyway, it showed that the left-wing party is the one that I painted up in red here. They were very good at linking to each other. So they created a sort of link universe among the political parties on the left, whereas the political parties on the right side did not link to each other. They were more kind of isolated islands. So it was probably a good way that they did it in the left-wing parties, because once you get into one of the web pages, then you would have a very big chance of staying within that universe through the links. And also actually the left-wing parties, they won this election in 2011. I don't know if it has anything to do with the hyperlinks, but anyway, they did win. And if you want to read a little bit about that, there are a few publications about that. This one here, the historical network analysis, is about this temporal inconsistency challenge. So the last case, then I'm scaling up once more from the individual website through this one with the networks, and then to the entire Danish domain. So this is you could say, statistical and structural analysis of the development of the entire .dk web domain. It's similar, as I mentioned, to .ru. And it's in terms of numbers, the Danish domain has a little bit more than 1 million websites. So what I'm studying in this project is 1 million websites for every year. So it makes it, of course, something that you cannot do manually. You have to do it by the use of computational methods in some way. And it's a period from 2006 to 2015. So I'm studying all these websites, 1 million per year. And the question I'm asking here is, what has characterized the entire Danish web domain .dk, and how has it developed over a 10-year period from 2005 to 15? And again, also theoretical and methodological developments are needed here. We have a lot of challenges related to doing historical analysis at this scale in terms of big data. It's simply just getting the material out of the web archive in a form that we can actually use with computational methods that has a lot of methodological challenges in it. So this study is based on the collections that I have found that can be found in the Danish web archive NetArchive from 2005 to 15. And as I mentioned, they archive the entire Danish domain 4 times per year. So we have selected one of these time slices per year. And it's between 600,000 as it was in 2006 and 1.1 million websites in 2015. In terms of bytes, it's between 10 and 30 terabytes per year. So this is kind of the scale of it. And we had to develop some digital methods because this is the first time that anyone has studied that much web material. So we had to develop digital methods. We had to develop analytical scripts to do kind of all the steps that we had to take. And it's simply just too big to run or to manage on a normal computer. So we had access to what is called the д.и.н Cultural Heritage Cluster, which is a high-performance computer at the Royal Library in Denmark. And once you get the material out of the web archive and you have, for instance, all the links, then you can run that information on a laptop. But to create the data takes really some powerful data. So what are we looking at in this project? We look at this. This is a list of the gross list of what we call probes. That is the thing, kind of, you could say, the measuring points we're looking at. We're looking at size, could be anything in terms of size. We're looking at the size of websites. How big is a Danish website in 2006, 9, etc. We're looking at the size of files. How big are image files and how has that developed? How big are whatever files and how has that developed? And you can measure size in so many other ways. We measured also, as I'm going to show you in a minute, the size of the entire Danish domain as well. We are looking at space. So we would like to, and we haven't gone to that yet, but we would like to take out the address information that is usually in the footer of web pages to see where the web domains are located in terms of geographical space in Denmark. So do most websites, so to say, live in the big cities or in the rural areas, or where are they actually located? Structure, hyperlinks, we can make analysis of the entire kind of link network on the entire Danish web. Are there any clusters on the Danish web where there are lots of linkings, etc.? How does that look? Liveliness is looking at updating, so we can check how updated a website is from one year to the next year, and see how, if there are any parts of the Danish web where it's very much updated or where it's not updated. We can look at content as well. Can be anything. For instance, when we look at files, we have done that. We have made a calculation of how many text files, that is HTML files, are there on the Danish web, and how many image files are there, how many video files, etc., how many JavaScripts. And you can use that to say a lot about what is on the web as a whole. So we can see that actually the ratio between written text and images is almost constant over all the years, which is a little bit surprising because we all have an impression that we have more images on the web, which we have, but we have also more text. So we have even more text than we have images. There's been a little bit more images, but it's not as many as you would expect. So that's what you can do with very simple things about studying a number of files, basically. If you study Java files or JSON, that's usually a file type that is used for interaction. So if you want to study how interactive the web has become, you can simply see the number of files of this type. So that's also something interesting. Finally, we would also like to study the textual elements or the text, the semantics. I'm starting a big project based on this data with a colleague from another department where we will make topic modeling of specific topics on the Danish web. So we have a list of some 20 topics that we would like to see where on the Danish web do people talk about this topic. So, and that's something that we're going to start within a month or so. And just to give you an impression how the size of it, we know exactly how many words there was on the entire Danish web. It's 66 billion per year. So, and that's kind of the things that we're going to study. 3 small examples, and then I'm finished of the results here. So this is the size of the Danish web. First, we calculate here number of objects in millions. That's the number of files, basically. And this is this one here. It kind of grows and grows until it flattens out in 2009 and 10. Then there is this strange dip, which you shouldn't take much notice of. You should basically made a line over here because it's something for technical reasons. Something went wrong with the web archiving software. So, but still, you can see from here, from 2013 to 15, it drops. So we can see that there actually becomes fewer and fewer files on the Danish web. The blue one here, the dark blue, is then the size in terabytes, and it also grows, also has a small dip, but then it continues to grow, and it grows very much actually, and it grows still. So in this point here where the 2 lines cross each other, you can actually, it's actually another way of saying that from this time onwards, we have fewer files, but they become bigger and bigger, which is another way of saying that on average, files become bigger from 2015. This one shows the size of websites. So imagine a website, could be your own website at the university. How many files does this website contain? So this is what we map with this graph here, and it should be read in a, it's a little bit difficult to read actually in a way, but this is the number of objects, this is how big it is on this axis. And this is a percentage of all the websites for each year that has this size. So as you can see, almost 95% of the Danish web is extremely small. It's very close to 0. Whereas we have the last part here, which is some, I don't know, 5%, which are extremely big. So this is an image of what the Danish web looks like. It is kind of a long tail thing. Very, very many, very small websites, and very few, very big websites. And the thing is that you can see the years out here, and they're actually in the graph. You can't even notice any difference. So this actually shows us that the Danish web has had this form all the years. Last slide is about all the links. This is not a graph of how the websites are connected, but this is simply just a calculation of how many links do we have from the entire Danish web to social media, and how has that developed over time. So you can see here, let's take Flickr, the image kind of sharing thing. It's this one here. It's big in 2008, it rises in 2009, and then it sort of declines. And this, of course, it's not surprising that Facebook, which is this one here, is very small. Then it starts to grow and grow and simply just explodes from 2012-13. And you can see other ones here as well, especially maybe the ones Instagram and Pinterest. You can see that Pinterest, or Instagram, sorry, is the one that kind of takes off first in terms of images, and Pinterest comes later. So this is a graph that shows how linked the Danish web is to social media, and to which social media, and how that has evolved over time. Yeah. So that was it. And then if you want to read some publications about that and this last project, here's a list of some of the things you could start with. And I think, yes, this was my last slide. So feel free to ask any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Nils. It's just a fantastic talk. I enjoyed so much, and I think that the other speakers enjoyed as well. And I can see that we have a question from Anna.
Well, but the billion
Ань, говори погромче, пожалуйста. Погромче.
Yeah, the sound is not very good.
Не очень, но я постараюсь. The thing is that Anna is very glad that we invited such a great specialist.
Thank you. I immediately I took your text from the chat and put it in Google Translate, so I can see what you've been saying.
У меня много вопросов, я даже не знаю.
У меня есть предложение. У меня есть предложение. Ань, давай ты напечатаешь их в чате, чтобы было хорошо слышно, и я их задам. Хорошо?
Давай.
А то я могу ошибиться, сейчас навру что-нибудь. Хорошо. So we decided that Anna will put all the information on the chat, and then I will translate her questions. So can I ask the question as well? I know that you are a great inventor of the term library.
That's right.
Yes, and actually, I read very carefully your book, so this is from the book. And do you think the ontology and taxonomy and the types of information resources and different sorts of web pages and websites and platforms and everything related to web sources should be some way classified? I know that it's not easy, but what the biggest issue in this great amount of different types and just some types that are on the conjunction between different sorts of the types, and should we even define these classes of web?
It's a very good question. I just wrote Pandora in the chat so that you know that that's what I'm saying. There are different approaches to that. So you have some countries, like in Australia, they have their web archive and it's called Pandora. And that's why I wrote that in the chat. And they do, you could say, traditional library work. They have selected a curated list of the websites they include in their website. And they do metadata and they do a lot of great stuff. So they do it as you would do it as a traditional librarian when you would add metadata to your collection, and you do it in, it's a very good collection they have in Australia. So that's one way of doing it. You have another way, which is what most countries do in Europe, at least, especially the UK, France, and Denmark. They do kind of big scale data. They just collect it all, basically. So that's what they do in Denmark. The .dk, take it all, 1 million websites. They do it in the UK, the .uk domain, it's 10 million websites. And then they can't do, because of the scale, they cannot do any typology or any metadata or whatever. So it's a matter of scale, basically. But you can choose to do both. You can do it on a small scale. You can do the metadata and all the things. And you can, if you do it in a big scale, it's becoming much more difficult. You could maybe do something in terms of on a more technical basis, but it's extremely difficult to make any typologies. But if you go to Pandora, you can simply see all the categories they have: business, sport, whatever.
It's more about the thematical categorization rather than on the types of the web source. I'm asking because my research is devoted to virtual museums, and it's a bit vague term as well, because when we talk about information web sources, it's just a great amount of them, and they're so different, and the structure is so flexible, and I think that there are so many opportunities maybe can be as a point of growth of the research in the field, if we can find some way to to make this the borderline between the sources? Maybe not.
Yeah. And that's it's also because it is evolving all the time. The virtual museums, they look very different today than they did earlier.
Come back at 7.
No, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I wanted to say thank you for mentioning Australia and the Pandora sort of archive, because you know that's a big initiative of our national government, and you know we feel proud about it. But you know, what could we do more to enhance it? You know, what could you know the collections be enhanced? So thank you.
Yeah, and it's also a very good question. There's many ways of answering that. I think if you already have a web archive, as is the case in Australia and in many countries now, it's extremely important that the archive develops. And one of the core groups that can make it develop is the researchers. So it's important that the researchers get in contact with the archives and try to set up a sort of a joint community between the web archiving institutions and the research communities, to give some feedback to the web archives and saying, this is what you're doing quite well here, but what about this? Have you thought about that? What about social media? Do you do that, etc., etc.? So that's a way of having it evolve. Yeah. So and it's as if this can be done in a very, you could say, formal way and institutionalized ways, then it's actually something that is also sustainable over time. Because if web archives just ask one researcher and he would like to go in one direction, another researcher would like to go in another direction, it's a little bit kind of difficult for them to do things with it. So if it's sustained over time with a group of people, it can help a lot.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, so much for the question. Professor Paul Arthur from Australia, Edith University. And we are moving to the questions from Anna. The first one is about, the question is what the book about history of internet and humanities is about. I can't remember the title of the book precisely, but maybe you can catch it.
Historical web. Historical web and humanities.
Let's see. Yeah, it's called The Historical Web and Digital Humanities, exactly. So it has a subtitle which you probably couldn't see, but that's actually telling what it's all about. The subtitle is The Case of National Web Domains. So what we do in this book and the different chapters do is that the discussion we would like to have is, what does a national web domain look like? Can we actually analyze them on a national level? Are there any difference between the Danish web, the French web, the UK web, the Canadian, etc., etc.? So there's a chapter about each of the countries' web domains and how that can be studied, if it can be studied at all, because they have different web archives. In the countries have different web archives. For instance, in the Netherlands, it's a very small web archive, so they do not have as much material as we have in Denmark or in France and the UK. And you have Belgium; they don't even have a web archive yet. I don't know about Russia. Do you have a web archive? Really interesting to know.
We have an only initiative in web archiving, which is devoted to the governmental resources. And it's provided by a non-commercial organization. And these people, they provide, they built a repository for web archival materials, and this data just open data for anyone who wants to work with them, and we can apply for the data set. But I would like to mention that we really need to expand these web archiving initiatives, because so many interesting things and important things to be saved for the future, because we're just losing our heritage. And it's very sad, yeah.
It's very sad. In Denmark, we lost, the Danish Web Archive started in 2005, so we lost almost 15 years of Danish web and cultural heritage. Again, Paul, you can be happy for Australia because they started in the Pandora in 1996. So that's very early days, and they have a great collection. Yeah, but again, and to get started, it could be the researchers who voice this need, and simply just as we did in Denmark. I was part of the establishing of the Danish Web Archive. We came up with some 3 or 4 studies that we could not make if we didn't have the Web Archive. So we went to the press and say we would like to study the extreme right or the extreme left in Denmark. We cannot do that if we don't have web archives, because very, very much of what is going on is only taking place on the web. And we had some 3 or 4 cases, and we just went around in the press and told about them. And at some point, then there was an interest growing.
And the second question is about the times, the time the website need to change the structure in average. Is it really 2 months? It's
in the book Doing History in the Digital Age, I had tried to dig a little bit more into this and found some different sources, but there's some saying it's even less and some saying it's even more, but something around that area is not incorrect. And again, if you go to social media and you have it's just exploding. I mean, it's changing all the time, basically.
And also, it's possible to trace through the metadata on the Internet Archive.
To
trace the changes in the structure. So they provide the dynamic, but not for all of them, of course, not for all of the resources, of course.
It depends on if they have them in the collection. So if they have, then you can go through, it's called the Wayback Machine, the interface you use for the Internet Archive, and then you get a timeline, and then you can go through the calendar in that timeline and see the different versions back in time, as I did with the 2 I started with. Yes.
And also there is an extension, not an extension, but it's just a part on the Internet Archive. I can't remember precisely what it's about, but it keeps metadata, and we can trace the interactive diagrams on the data structure, on the website structure. Yeah. And I think we can move to the third question. Could you tell me us about the reason why you do not analyze the design of website together with the other features?
Yeah, and I would like to, and I probably also will in the first case study I mentioned about the one about the Danish broadcasters website. I will definitely include the layout and the design of the web page, because you can do that if it's a close reading project where you actually only look at very limited numbers of web pages. We also will try to do it in the big scale study. Try to look at least some points of the layout. You probably all remember that some years ago, a menu on a website was always placed in the left side. Suddenly they changed, and then they are always placed in the top. When did that happen? And are there any kind of genre specificities? So it's a specific type of website that have it still in the left, or I don't know how that has developed, but it could be interesting to know. But we couldn't come up with a good and solid way of doing it computationally. Because when you have 1.1 million domain names, you cannot do it manually. So you have to be able to translate the research question to something that you can do with a computer in an automatic way. And we haven't come up with a solution to that yet, but it could probably be done. And it could be really interesting to see the layout on that very, very simple level of the placement of the menu.
Yes, it's very important to formalize some way these sort of things related to design or to the other things that are invisible for the machine without any sort of instruction. For instance, when we have visually reached content, such as virtual museums, for instance, we can't analyze and we can't approach them just and trace them manually. It's just such a hard thing. But it's the thing when we can, it's a point of growth, I would say that. So when we have a tool or something, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also the virtual museums and things where you have interaction is very, very difficult to archive for a web archive. I'm not a web archivist myself, but I know from hearing saying that it's very difficult for them to do that. So in some cases, if you really, really want to preserve the interaction, then you should do it in another way. It could be doing a screen movie, simply filming your screen while you move around. But again, that doesn't scale well. You can only do that for a kind of a limited number of websites. But it's a way of preserving kind of the interaction and the thing that's going on a virtual web. Yeah.
And I'm sure that the possible solution can be found only on the way of cooperation and the things you do with your colleagues in Ressort and other infrastructures. So thank you so much for your work, for what are you doing, and thank you so much for your presentation here. It's a very important talk.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you. And I have to mention that it's very important to analyze information which can appear in different sorts of forms. It can be text or image, but and we have so many tools to analyze text because in terms of methodology, it's much easier to deal with the text because it's more than 70 years of textual analysis and computational analysis, but it's much more difficult to deal with images and video and audio as well. So it's a short bridge to our next guest. And let me introduce to you Associate Professor Kahal Gurrin, who is a great person and who's a very interesting researcher who deal with life logging. The thing is that I've translated everything in Russian, but I'll try to make it vice versa. So Kahal Gurrin is Associate Professor of the Dublin City University, Ireland, and he's a Vice Dean of the department, and he's a researcher at the Insight Center for Data Analytics and Adapt Center. And he deals with life logging, as I said, and it's the such a thing that unites the personal experiences and information technologies, informatics, health analytics, and it can be analyzed on the basis of chronofiles. So we can learn about it a bit more during the presentation. And also I have to mention that Kahal is very active in organization of seminars devoted to the life logging. So thank you so much, Kahal, that you're here, and very welcome.
Spasiba Dezena. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. That's about all the Russian that I have. I will share my screen and I'll go through my presentation. Thank you very much to the last two speakers. That was really interesting. Personally, Nils, my background was in web search. So back a long time ago, was building many web crawlers, Irish language focused web crawlers back a long time ago. So very interesting to relook at that area again, I think. I think great. Ireland doesn't actually have a proper web archive, so maybe I need to look into that. But thank you.
You have a collection actually at the Royal Library or the library in Ireland.
Okay, so I'll have to go and talk to those guys, but it's very interesting anyway. So thank you, Nils. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the idea of life logs or chronofiles. And this idea that we are all now generating information footprints about ourselves, but what can those information footprints look like as we move forward? So that's the focus of what my talk is going to be. If you ever want me to stop to do a translation, let me know. So an information footprint, from what we consider it to be, is a digital trace of a person's life activities, their contributions and their communications. So what they create, how they communicate, what they do, captured in a passive manner, captured passively and stored on computing systems indefinitely. Okay, a few different caveats there. So passive capture, you don't have to do anything particular to capture it, and it gets stored not necessarily even under your control for long periods of time, indefinitely. So that's what we think an information footprint is. And the whole flow, I'm not a historian at all, I'm a computer scientist. And the whole flow of this talk made me go back and think that, look, if we think about it, from thousands of years ago, people were recording logs or experiences written in whatever medium they had. So we were recording on cave walls, okay, creating durable objects we can still see now. And of course, it moved on to writing and papers and books. Here's an example of a beautiful Irish book called the Book of Kells. Of course, being written around about the year 800, it was about religion, but it was a beautifully constructed manuscript that very, very few people can actually write or can actually, at that stage, even be able to create content, okay? But we still have this small historical archive. Of course, going forward through the centuries, people can write diaries. And this is an example of a diary that we have. We have this lady's diary, Rosamund Jacob, and she wrote diaries for around about 72 years of her life every day. And they've been digitized by one of our partner universities. And we're building search engines for her diary, okay? And it's quite interesting because she was writing about historical activities at the time. She was involved in the Civil War in Ireland. She was involved in many of the political activities. And you see her entries in the diary that map back to real world data on real websites that we can then build links to. So we're building essentially a search engine for these kind of data archives. And it's quite difficult to do because sometimes she writes in English language, sometimes she writes in Irish language. You can see Irish at the top of the page, and the Irish language writing is actually sometimes incorrect because at that time under British rule, we weren't allowed to learn Irish. So the writing was as we spoke. So that's other kind of diaries that people can gather. Now, diaries, some people gather, not very many people, because it takes time and it takes effort. However, one I want to bring to your attention is the Dymaxion chronophile. This is where the word chronophile came from, a chronology filing system. And a guy called Richard Buckminster Fuller tried to document his life from 1920 to 1983. And he had an entry in this 80-meter long book every 15 minutes. Every correspondence he got, bills, notes, sketches, ideas written down, 140,000 pieces of paper and film and hours of audio tape and even video recordings going in the later years. This is now in Stanford, in the Stanford University Library. But this is, as far as we can see, this is a chronophile. This is a life log, okay? However, the difficulty here is that it takes a lot of effort, human time. You need resources. You need to be certainly richer than the average person to generate these kind of documents. Even the diary that Rosamund Jacob gathered, she wouldn't have been a normal person. So what we're looking at is something more automatic. So can we make an automatic chronophile? And that's the challenge. And looking back in 1946, Vannevar Bush introduced the idea of a Memex, a desk based on technology of the time that could index or build a search engine for everything a person encounters. They would wear a camera on their head here. They could take pictures. They could scan books that they've read. This was a concept. Of course, in 1946, you couldn't build this concept, okay? It was just an idea. So we waited a couple of decades. And then a friend of mine, Gordon Bell, famous American computer scientist, working at Microsoft as a researcher, doing pretty much whatever he wanted to do at Microsoft, he built the first Memex, okay, based on databases, and it ingested, or it took in all of his papers, his letters, his books, his locations, web pages he looked at, all of his life captured. And what's really interesting is he is wearing a camera in this picture around his neck. That camera was built in Microsoft in 2004 and was an automatic camera that takes about 2,000 pictures every day. So not only is his writings, his books, but also his life gets captured into the search engine, into the My Life Bit search engine. And that's what I want to, for the next 10 minutes or so, talk about briefly. So a chronophile, modern chronophile really is a collection of data about the person. And I was fascinated because in 2004, I listened to Gordon give a lecture at a conference in the UK, SIGIR 2004. And I thought this was really interesting. And very fortunately, Microsoft had a competition in 2006, and 6 research groups won 2 cameras of these wearable cameras. And we got, the only non-American university to get access to the cameras was us. And I started to take the data, take the cameras and wear them. And it made me realize that, you know, there's a lot of value in capturing passive life data. When we take a picture with our phone, we take a picture because we want to take a picture. We want something to capture. But what happens when you take pictures automatically? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 every day. And this is what we started to do. So in 2006, I started to digitize my life experience and make them searchable. So think about a Google search engine where the index is you, not the web, it's you. And thus far, we have in my archive about 20 million images. If you're capturing 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 images per day automatically, very quickly you get into millions. Sensor readings, screenshots captured from my computer automatically. Everywhere you go, captured into an archive. So this is what we call a chronophile. And really, it's about gathering as much as we can into a digital archive. Born digital data captured into a person's chronophile. So we capture what we see using wearable cameras. And this is an example of what we use now as wearable cameras, okay? It takes about 2,000 pictures a day. No video unless I ask it to. It records video, just like now, but mostly it just sits and takes pictures. We can record what we hear through our mobile phones, recording the audio. We can record where we go to through our mobile phones, our activities through our mobile phones, biometrics through our fitness trackers and various other devices, our speech. Even we've started recording our attention when we sit at our computer desk, what captures our attention. Add to that, we can now record our information needs, our Google searches, what we read digitally, because now we read, or I read, everything on a tablet computer, what we write on a tablet computer or on our computer, and everything we can about our information captured. Now you get a lot of information that generates a chronophile. So the idea is that through these wearable and informational sensors, anybody, not just somebody who happens to have money to write a diary 100 years ago, or somebody that can have an entry every 15 minutes, anybody who wants to can gather a detailed multimedia personal life log or chronophile that they can use for many benefits. And right now, you can buy these camera devices for $50. Everybody has a smartphone. Most people have a fitness tracker of some sort. So we all can do this. And in a longer talk, I would talk about some of the benefits of these technologies. Augmented health or wellness, augmented thinking, cognition, memory, and even augmented society. But that's not for today. What I will say is that the way we see these archives, these chronophiles, is that they're a permanent companion. Just like we turn to Google when we need to find something, we should turn to our chronophile when we need to remember something that we can't remember. That's the idea. So if you start off as a child gathering a chronophile, you will use it for education, supporting knowledge creation. In your work, as you're an adult, you'll probably use it to support your work. And as you get older, you'll probably use it to support your health. Okay, this is the idea behind why we might do this. Focusing on wearable cameras, because that's what people think most about when they think of this space. The typical wearable cameras gather between 1,000 and 4,000 pictures a day. They can record video if you want. We don't really do that. They can record sound. whatever you want them to record. They typically have a battery life that lasts for a whole day. So you put them on in the morning, take them off at night. And they gather pictures just like this, high quality, look as if you took them with your camera phone, but actually they came from a wearable camera. In fact, to be honest, these came from a Google Glass, if you remember Google Glass years ago. So add to that all of the other sources of digital data. And one of the challenges we had was, how do we capture our computer use? Because 5 years ago, there was no software we could get that could capture all my keystrokes on my keyboard, could capture my mouse movements, could capture my screens of what I see on the screen. So we wrote our own software called Loggerman, and it's available to download from Mac if you want to use it. It stores locally on your computer a complete trace of all your computer usage. Every time you move the mouse, it stores your mouse movement. Every keystroke, the key pressure, every screen you look at, everything you type, everything you copy, everything you read goes into a personal search engine. More chronofile data. In reality, whatever you want to measure about yourself, you can be sure there is something on the market that can give you that data. And where it's not there, we build our own. So, of course, as a computer scientist, this is difficult because we have different types of data gathered about ourselves with different frequencies, a wearable camera picture twice a minute, maybe, a heartbeat 72 times a minute, okay? Location, GPS locations every few seconds, different modalities, different error rates, and it just keeps going. You start recording and you never stop. So our life logs, if we were to export to data, look like this. So at 6:04 a.m. on a certain date, whatever date it was, I was at home and I was walking. I was using this many calories that minute. My galvanic skin response, my stress level was low, my heart rate was low, my skin temperature was normal-ish. And the image I took from my wearable camera is stored. The image I took on my phone is stored. What I was typing on my phone is stored. And even the music I was listening to on my Amazon Alexa device was stored. And this is what our life log looks like. Imagine you have this every minute of every day of your entire life. So what does that look like? Well, if we had an 85-year lifespan, I'm hoping 85 years, I hope, that gives me about half to go. A 4K video stream from a wearable camera would require 342 terabytes per year, too much, or 28.3 petabytes per lifetime, too much, okay? HD video is much smaller. Wearable cameras like the autographer camera, another one like this, is actually very manageable, okay? About $15 worth of disk space every year to store this data. Completely manageable if you move from video to pictures, and then various other forms of data. So here's a question. It's really easy to do, cheap to do, okay? Wearable camera, $15, $20 per year, I can store all this data. So what happens when this becomes normal, if it becomes normal, okay? So let's have a look briefly as I finish at what people have been doing with the data. So in its simplest form, 2,000 or 3,000 pictures a day isn't very useful unless you organize it. So here's an organized digital, born digital diary of a person visually captured and automatically organized into events that took place that day. Who were you talking to? What were you eating? All automatically organized. So the person does nothing. They plug the camera into charge every night and the system generates a digital diary. We've taken it a step further and built some pretty cool looking touchscreen walls. If you ever saw a movie called Minority Report with Tom Cruise, he's moving things around on a large screen. Imagine that for your life. The pictures, the locations you are, all searchable and color-based on a large wall. The talk was introduced, thank you very much, but the introduction was exactly right because Edna, you spoke about automatically analyzing images. And now we have the tools to do this cheaply. Not only can you gather 2,000 or 3,000 pictures a day, you can now know what's in those pictures without having to do anything. Here was an example application we wrote back 5 or 6 years ago that ran on a Google Glass. The Google Glass will take a picture every 15 seconds and the system would tell you what's in the picture 1 second later. So you have really deep context of what the person is seeing. And if you look at this picture of a postdoc, Zhang, the system says after 1 second that is a desktop computer, monitor, screen, desk, notebook, mouse, laptop, printer, website, and television. 9 of those 10 are correct. And that was 5 or 6 years ago. Now the quality is significantly better for these kind of tools. So we can know what's happening in somebody's life. So we worked with colleagues in Australia and in New Zealand and in China, and we built this system a couple of years ago to analyze people's life. So we built this tool which focused initially on food marketing. The camera device was given to school children. They wore the camera for 5 days, and 200 children. And we got back the data and we analyzed it semi-automatically to identify when were the children exposed to food marketing, bad food marketing, chocolate, sugar drinks, all these kind of things. And we found 27.3 times per day. Alcohol marketing, another example, 85% of times children went to supermarkets, they saw alcohol advertising. Not just saw alcohol advertising. And this can be expanded to anything. If you care about how many times do people see the postman, right? Anything can be done in this kind of a system for any number of people that provide you with the data. Of course, being computer science, we built some pretty cool looking 3-dimensional systems that you can play with and move around with your hands, not so important. Some of our colleagues built really detailed visualization tools to visualize somebody's life, a year of life, a decade of life, and build really complicated search engines that allow you to search for locations, people, objects like dogs, chocolate, coffee cups, whatever it is you want to find. And here was the best performing system that we had at a recent competition, which was allowing you to find location-based, object-based activities to answer questions like, find a time when I was in a hotel in Norway having breakfast before I gave a lecture in a university. And the systems find this content for us quite easily. So what we've had to do to move obviously being scientists, we care about moving the area forward. We have generated data sets for our researchers in computer science to use. And we have wearable camera data. We have associated smartphone data. We have the biometric data. We have data from inbuilt sensors to sense your blood sugar levels. We have data on your information accesses and your information creation, and even your human activities. Where were you? What were you doing? How did you get there? What food did you eat? All organized as that XML file previously into minute by minute. We release our data sets and we have competitions where all around the world, different researchers in computer science take part to build a better chronofile search engine. And the answer queries like this: find a moment when somebody was taking a photograph of an A380. And the search engines, just like these guys back here, are meant to find that really, really fast. And this is the kind of way we progress in computer science, the challenge of chronofiles. Now, okay, so I'm going to finish now because I'm out of time. There are some societal issues here, right? Information footprints gathered like that. Life logging is not just an activity for the individual. It's not like I put on a fitness tracker. There's more than that. I put on a wearable camera. I'm taking your picture, not just my own health data. Okay. It looks outwards. Any kind of really good chronofile looks at what a person does and captures people. People they're talking to, people they're eating with, people on the bus, whatever. So all issues like ethics. Should we do this? Privacy. Can we do this? Right to be forgotten. Can somebody tell one of us who gathered this data that they do not want to be in our data set? I don't give you permission for my picture in your data. And how can we go and solve these? Where's the balance between a person's right to record versus a person's right to be forgotten or not visible? What happens if the person who wants to gather the chronofile uses it for a reason such as supporting their memory. Maybe they're old, maybe they have Alzheimer's, maybe they have bad memory, okay? And they can use this as a personal memory. So it may be easy to ask the question, why or how, or should you do this? In reality, the answer is much, much more difficult. But I will say, right now, it's still a strange thing. Facebook, Apple, other companies, Google, Microsoft are all building glasses that capture data. And while most people will not wear this, most people will wear this. And when this becomes a platform, just like your smartphone is now a platform, then a lifelog, a chronofile, especially a visual chronofile, can become an app. And when that becomes an app, then you may find that there are 1 million people using chronophiles in Russia 2 years later. Okay? And what happens with that? Technology normally progresses, so I think it's almost inevitable. Okay, spasiba. I think that means thank you. There's a book as well. If you want to download it, do a Google search, download a book from the DC website. It is, of course, completely free as well. So thank you. Hopefully that was interesting.
Thank you so much, Kachal, for your interesting talk. And yes, I have so many questions, but I would like to encourage the audience to ask their questions. You can put them on chat or ask them orally. While you just, okay, Anna, just you can ask your question or take it according to our tradition.
Thank you, Kachal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kachal, for your interesting presentation. And now I am in Russian. Надежда, а вот скажи, пожалуйста, камера такая была приведена, автографа-камера, это что такое? Я не нашла перевод, и там больше всего информации копится, вот производится на этом виде устройств, этих вот следов информационных. Автографа-камера, это что такое? Не понимаю.
Anna asks you about could you tell us a bit more about the equipment, exactly about the camera? What is the orthographic camera as it was on the slide?
Okay, let me go back and I'll find that slide and I'll talk through it. Where is it? It's here. Okay, back. Oh, I've got to go back. Can you see my... Have I window? I lost my okay.
It's disappeared as well.
We are waiting. We are waiting.
So
a little.
I didn't share my screen, right?
Not now.
But I was sharing my screen before, wasn't I? Yes, I was. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I share
No
my
doubt.
screen again? I just thought I spoke and forgot to share my screen. Okay. Here's my keynote. So there are numerous different wearable cameras you can buy. Okay. The one I use is called the Narrative Clip. It's about $300. I don't think the company makes them anymore. I think they've moved on to doing other things. There are many different, I don't know, in Russia, you must have equivalent of Amazon.com for searching for wearable cameras. And all they do is they just turn on and take pictures, do nothing else. And they're connected normally via USB back to your computer. And then you just extract every evening thousands of pictures off the cameras. They're designed to take pictures continually, every 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and the battery life should last for the whole day. And then they give us really beautiful archives like that. However, in reality, most of the pictures, if you wear a camera like this, are just your computer screen, if you're a professor, or your steering wheel, if you're driving your car. Most of the data is actually not valuable. It's the non-normal data that's actually really valuable. The interactions you have, the non-standard places you go to are what's really, really useful. But they're available online. You can just buy them and use them. Some of the ones I have a little, if you look back there, I have a little museum of different cameras I've used. They can cost as little as $30 and just gather data. And of course, the value of the data isn't just the pictures. It's what you can do with the pictures when you have the pictures. So we replace this diary being replaced with the kind of visual search engine for your life. And that's why we think the cameras are really useful, because they allow us to gather this data with no human input. Put on the camera in the morning, go take off the camera at night, and 2,000 pictures sitting waiting for you.
Да, thank you, thank you. А можно еще один вопрос, Надежда?
Да, конечно.
Да, можно, Надь? Ага.
Конечно, да-да.
Да, я историк. И в связи с этим, как вы думаете, когда вообще вот эти цифровые следы, вот эти хронофайлы могут представлять интерес для историков? То есть когда специалисты, добывающие знания о прошлом, смогут реально вовлечь, когда для них это станет историческим источником, вот эти хронофайлы?
Thanks so much for the question.
Да?
It's a very important one. Yeah. And the question is about when these chronofiles have a chance to become historical source to be used in the research.
Yeah. So the first time it was ever used in research would have been 17 years ago, right? And that was used for memory science, understanding how people remember by having data versus human memory. Moving forward to now, there's nothing to stop you building these data sets right now. The system we used for the children's food and alcohol advertising was built 5 years ago, okay, even longer. Everything is available now. If you want to gather historical archives of people, it's very cheap to do it now. And even these cameras that I have here, there was at least 120,000 of these sold before the company stopped selling them. So there's lots of these cameras going around. There's lots of other companies building them. If you have a platform like Facebook Glass or Apple Glass next year, glasses, then you can build apps for these glasses that allow you to go and gather data at certain locations, at certain points in time. So it's completely doable now. I've been doing it for 15 years every day, all day. So I kind of pretty sure now that there's no, the advices we have now are good enough to gather a really, really good data set. And if you want to do it for historical archives of people, normal everyday people, it's completely possible to do. If our partners in New Zealand or Australia could do this for 200 children 5 years ago, we can do it now as well.
And I think we can continue this talk about the historical source. I'll just ask the question which is related to this thing. On the one side, we have to die to discover the personal data from these sort of chronofiles. So, and not only die, but we need 70 years extra, or probably a bit less, but it's too much. There are so many practical things in life logging, in health care and everything, but in historical terms, it's a sort of delayed value for historians to use chronofiles as historical source. Yeah. But I would like to ask the question about the community of life loggers. Is it a sort of community? Do you know something about that? Probably, yeah. What can be a useful approach to use these chronofiles in some sort of research when those people are just in different parts of the world, when it's just a virtual community?
Okay. That's a very good question. So, I mean, there are lots of people out there who use these cameras, not for scientific purpose, just for recording things that they find interesting, maybe holidays, recording the children when they're growing up, whatever it is that they want to record. Is there a community? There is a community, but it's not very well organized. So there's no real, I can't say this is the community, we all meet here. There is no such thing as that. But a lot of these people who gather data like this understand the value of data. And that's why they're gathering data. Because with a lifelog, you gather data now without knowing how you will use it later. Okay. So certainly if you're interested in exploring people's experiences or life activities, there's probably a community of people out there who will share data with you. Okay. Or else maybe the approach is that you send your software to them to analyze their data and send back the results. But there's definitely ways of getting access to data. It's a very expensive and slow process, as you've just alluded to gather a lifelog starting now, okay? Because a year of lifelog data cannot be crawled. Like Niels has a benefit of crawling the data, it's there. With a lifelog, you have to generate it. And as Niels said in his talk, if you don't start, the data's gone. In a lifelog, if you don't start, the data's gone. So when I started 15 years ago, I didn't know what I would do. I just gathered it because the data is useful. So certainly there's a lot of value for us as I guess, as researchers, just to try to get people to gather data or share data with us, because if you don't gather it, it's going to be gone. So the data, if you had a life experience of people 100 years ago wearing cameras like this, wouldn't it be wonderful? Okay, but we don't have that. We have 10 photographs captured of somebody's whole life. Okay, so yeah, I really feel strongly that it's going to take a long time, but we should start to gather these archives.
Yeah, it's a very crucial question, actually, how to use this data in 15 or more years.
Yeah, so
what you can lose, yeah.
I mean, you don't know how you're going to use it, right? But we do know that if you want to find anything in that visual data, a face, a brand, a type of food, and whatever animal, whatever it is you want to find, the tools now are good enough to find that. When we run these competitions every year to find the best approach to finding content, like the airplane and the lifelog, every year the search gets better. So we're getting much, much better at finding anything you want. Some of our queries were quite complicated. Find a time when I was looking at a picture. It looked like aliens from space, and I was having cake. And it's very complicated kind of query, but the systems are able to find now very quickly and very effectively. So it's so that very few queries we give to the systems are not findable. So everything you want 15 years later, if you have the data, can be found.
And it's very important to mention that a couple of years ago, we talked to you about the possibilities to connect the data we are thinking about with the data that we can see. Yeah. And now I've seen in your presentation that it's just great to have these sort of applications to record what you are writing and what sorts of pages you visit on the internet. So it's not about just recording the thinking yet, but it's a recording of our activities that were not recorded previously. Yeah. And this sort of information makes a bridge to the web archiving, and this is a personal web archiving initiative. It's a very important one.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's now really easy. If you use an Apple computer, okay, if you type in this command, change your location of where you want to store the files, you can gather every 60 seconds your full screen, timestamped and everything, just by typing that one command into the command window of an Apple computer. Like it's so easy to do this now. So part of the, I guess, my motivation in this work is that even though I don't know ever how I'm going to use this screen data, I have it. And I have it for X number of years now. And at some point it may become very useful or it may not, but it's cheap and it's free. If it costs me $20 a year to store my LifeLog right now, I mean, why not? Just do it.
Is it the password to your LifeLog account?
No, this is the command. If you put into the Mac, Apple Macintosh, Apple laptop command window, this will generate a picture of your screen every 60 seconds. And name the picture the same as a timestamp. And it's the easiest thing you can do. And then suddenly you have an archive of 1, 2, 3 years of your computer usage. Put that through a text or an OCR tool to read the text on the screen, put into a search engine, and you have a search engine of your computer usage. I mean, everything is now easy to do. We really don't capture the data that we can. It's all there if we just do some pretty easy things right now to capture the data.
And we just need to be brave to record this data and understand their value.
Yeah, and understand the society impact of wearing a camera. Yeah, also interesting.
Anna has another question.
Да, все-таки я вот выражу обеспокоенность. Знаете, коллеги, по поводу чего? Вот из этого процесса анализа этих визуальных данных, этих файлов, историк совершенно будет исключен. Он ничего в них не поймет. То есть дисквалифицируется, изменяется в этом случае профессия историка, получается, он должен быть информатиком, он должен быть программистом, IT-специалистом, иначе это иероглифы. Вот что делать с этим? Я не знаю.
Thank you for the question. It's an important one. So the question is, Anna is very concerned about the future of the profession of historians. How can their role to be changed in this process? Because everything can be done by the machine or by the code.
Yeah.
And what is the,
But I think if you were to say, if I was to give a presentation in 1975 to accountants, they'll be very afraid of the spreadsheet. Okay, because the technology moves and it makes your life easier, but you can get more value and do things faster. Instead, my brother, for example, is a PhD in history and historian, and he spends a lot of time looking for data. Okay. Not so much time extracting value from the data. He's looking for the data. He's going to historical records, going through birth records, death records, finding things. What happens if that data is suddenly available and you can analyze it and understand it better? I think it's not a threat to historians. It's an opportunity to go and do research when you don't have to spend time trying to understand the data. The data is there. You make the queries and you get back the results. So it used to take hours to calculate financial accounts. Now it takes seconds, but we still need accountants. Okay, we still need the people to do this job, people who understand. So you have a lot of better data to work with. It's not replacing, it's making your life and your output better. That's how I see it.
And I would complete a bit this answer with the idea that the role of the historian is not only gathering the data, it transforms to the interpretation of data. And the abilities of the machine to interpret this data are a bit narrow right now. Yes, the machine can build a variety of visualizations to expose some way the trends, but the interpretation and the relation to the other things, to the other topics and everything can be done by the human.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if in the nearest 50 years something will be changed crucially.
No, all we can do is give you the data and the tools to extract the knowledge you want from the data. no, the information you want from the data. The knowledge and the learning has to come from the professional historian, the person who understands what to look for and how to look for it and what's important.
Yes, and the role of the historian is to raise the question.
Yeah. Like if you had a life log of 1 million Russian people for the last 10 years today, what would you do?
We would check the poll results.
I say nothing.
Okay, any other questions? I think that our talk was very, very fruitful, and actually I enjoyed so much speaking English without the need to translate everything. It's just the great thing. So I think that as soon as we have no questions to our guests, I have to say thank you so much. Kachal, Nils, and Elena, she's not with us now, but it's just great that you had a chance to come to us and to give these fantastic presentations. I'm glad so much. We spent more than 2 hours talking about the history and related things, and I think it can be continued in some other forms. Probably we can talk more about these topics in the future in the other formats, to have the chance to be a bit more deeply in more details and to have a sort of discussion. So you can expect a message from me with these sorts of invitations. And thanks so much for coming, and thank you so much for those who asked the questions, who just came to the presentations and to the event. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome to the other our events. And as well, I would like to invite all of you to participate in the event, in the roundtable devoted to different cultures in digital history. We organized together with the Center for Contemporary and Digital History of the University of Luxembourg. And you can save the date 8th of June. And the event will be announced soon. And I will let you know the details of registration. And we will have some fantastic people to talk about digital history, and everyone is welcome to join. And yeah, thank you so much. And we can finish our seminar with the warmest wishes to you, to all of you. And I really hope that someday we will go back to normal life and meet in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank
Looking
you.
forward to it. Thank you for the invitation. And
Thank you all.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.